everybody, back again. We've got a few questions here today, but before I really get into the rest of them, I did say yesterday that I'd mention a little more about Jeff Ports. So I'll just tell you about Jeff first. I first met Jeff Ports probably 1965 in Bradford, because he was a Bradford lad. Came from Bradford, and I wrestled him there for Norman Morell. Well, he turned out to be another Ernest Baldwin, really. He was the sort of fellow that would, chance his luck. He had one of these, like I said with Baldwin, he had one of these short elbows that would catch you under the chin. And it was deliberate to try and, I suppose, to find out what you were made of. Well, as he was 10 years older than me, I suppose he must have thought at the time I was a pushover. But that night he got a bit of a surprise because I wasn't a pushover. I had him down and mauled him around for quite a while because I could do that. I don't think he realised what he was getting into, because when I got to know Jeff better, Jeff wasn't that brave, really. So God knows why he thought he could do that to me. But going a bit further forward, when I was in Canada with him, there, one night he was billed with George Gordienko. This is when he came back, when he was just about to, been back about a week, couple of weeks. He was billed with George Gordienko. And we're in this dressing room where he had the old-fashioned seats with sort of hooks, a row of hooks over the top where you could hang your clothes. And there was a couple of rows of these. Well, George had come early and he got in the bottom corner out of the way, and he was sort of meditating, because George was a very serious sort of guy. And Jeff came in, and they hadn't travelled together, and Jeff had only realised, I think it was Lethbridge or Saskatoon or something like that, I can't think where it was, or what we call the circuit. And Jeff comes in, he's moaning about being on with George. Because if you know what you're talking about, George and he were both baby faces on that bill. Well, it'd be a very difficult match because there'd be no real heat, and Jeff would have to try and wrestle George. Well, that wouldn't be that easy really, because George wasn't the easiest person in the world to chuck around. He wouldn't let you chuck him around. George wouldn't, because he wasn't that type of guy. If you were going to do something with George, it had to be done properly. So he's doing a bit of moaning, and suddenly he realises George is in the corner listening. You never seen a man shut up so quick in all your life. Anyway, George heard all this, didn't he? And all the boys knew he'd heard him, so we all went out to watch. That was interesting, to say the least. I think Jeff regretted it at the end of the day. Anyway, later on, I think it was on the same circuit, we're coming back from, I think it was at Regina or somewhere like that. We do the long trip back to Calgary for the television show the next day. And we stop, it's about a 400-mile journey, I think. It's quite a long way. And we stop for something to eat. We're all in this cafe, middle of the night cafe. And most of the wrestlers are recognisable because they've been on the television. And there was about 4 youths on one side of the cafe, and they're having a little bit of a rib amongst themselves about wrestling. They didn't really aim it at the wrestlers, but it was obvious what they were doing. They were taking the mickey out of wrestling in general. And they were all listening to this, and one of the lads got up, to go out to go to his car, really. And all he did was just slap one of these lads across the face. And this lad did nothing. He just took the slap across the face. They were only youngsters. I think they're probably 19, 20, 21 or something like that. Silly kids, really. But how Jeff noticed that this lad did nothing. The next thing I know, Jeff's going out, but he dragged this lad off his seat and he was on the floor. Laying into him as if he was doing something, he was beating a fighter up. To be honest, I didn't like that. So I got up and told him to behave himself. I said, what are you doing? Why are you doing that? You know, he's just a bloody kid. Leave him alone. He took me on my word and he stopped and he buggered off. But that's the sort of thing that Jeff would do. He wouldn't be the first one to jump in there. He made sure he was safe before he did it. Because you could have, you know, if you're on these motorways or on these cafes and you're not really a tough guy, which he wasn't, you have to be careful who you choose on, who you pick on. Because these lads with a group, if you jump up and grab one of them, they could all set them on you, couldn't they? But Jeff bided his time. He waited, he hung back and made sure he was on safe territory. And that's the sort of the earmark of a coward, really, isn't it? And he was like that. He was never the first one in. If he thought it was safe to go in, he'd be there. He'd show his, you know, he'd have a little go if he thought it was safe. But if there's any danger, Jeff... And when he moved from Calgary and places like that, he never came back to the UK, I don't think. He moved into the States. But who does he befriend out there? Billy Robinson. He becomes a big friend with Billy Robinson. That's pretty safe, isn't it? Because I do believe that he actually was godfather to one of Billy's children. So he got very close to Robinson. That was a pretty safe thing to do, wasn't it? You know, he needed his own policeman. Because he wasn't that tough himself, I can tell you. So that's really winding the Canadian saga up. So we'll go back to the questions. So the first one is from Dolphin Boy, and he says, I seem to remember seeing an old poster for Kendo Nagasaki versus The Undertaker. The match never happened, but would you have liked to have worked with him, Mark Calloway, when you were younger? Well, I suppose it would have been a rather difficult match to get something out of. I mean, the best way I can sort of really, a parallel to that, is when Kendo wrestled the A-Stacks. Although the A-Stacks wasn't a mysterious character like Calloway was, this Undertaker guy, wasn't he? Merged out of a coffin and had some sort of grave-like image. I don't know how difficult it would have been to get something together that would have worked. But I do know that when Kendo got in the ring with the Stacks, who was a big guy, you know, and one of the top villains in the UK, well, you know, one of the top villains, yeah. Every time he got in the ring with Kendo was the villain. Stacks was turned into a babyface. And that made the job easy, really, because the audience used to think that this monster, the A-Stacks, would destroy Kendo Nagasaki. And that's what they wanted, but of course it never really happened in that way. And the Stacks used to complain that I was ruining his gimmick because I was turning him into a babyface. I don't think that's what would have happened with our friend The Undertaker, but I would say it would be quite a difficult match, really, from the point of view of who was the good guy and who was the bad guy. And two bad guys wrestling each other is a bit of a stalemate, really. There's nothing in it. If you split your audience, if half want one guy, half want the other, it doesn't make for a good evening of entertainment, or the crowds. They're mixed up, really, muddled. They've got to be directed. They've got to know what they want to get behind, and they need a good, you know, a baby face and a villain. It's cowboys and Indians, really, isn't it? So I'm not sure. My opinion is it wouldn't have worked, but I could be wrong. Right, next one is from Richard Waite, 8455. And he says, what do you think of Marty Jones and Mark Rollerball Rocco and their wrestling styles? Right. Well, both Marty and Rocco, I mean, Rocco really was a villain, but he was good for me because when he was on with me, he was a babyface. They really wanted Rocco to give me a good sort of beating up. And Marty was always a babyface anyway, so that was reasonably easy, you know. There was no sort of conflict of interest there. He was the good guy and I was the bad guy, and we always had very we had very convincing matches with Marty, really. Marty was a solid individual. He was solid in his wrestling. He has a solid, down-to-earth personality. I mean, he comes over as that sort of person, the sort of person you can rely on. Marty, he's got that sort of trustworthy personality, hasn't he? He's a Yorkshire lad, basically, so trustworthy. Rocco is a different kettle of fish because Rocco's all hell and fire and run around like an express train. I mean, funny when you wrestle Rocco, really, because in the dressing room, before you go on, an hour before you go on, Mark seems quite sort of calm and calm down. About 10, 15 minutes before you go on, he starts to rev up. Let's go. And there's a personality change, really, from the dressing room a couple of hours beforehand to 10 minutes before he's going in. He's starting to rev. And that revving up goes on right the way through to the end of the match. Mark is he was a bundle of energy. He was here, there and everywhere. I mean, sometimes I had to tell him to fuck off and quieten down because he's a lot younger than I am, wasn't he? So I only got Mark really after the Hippodrome show, and when I'm doing my sort of second thing, coming back for the second time. I've retired in 77 and I've had a long period out, probably 8 years out of the job. I've come back and I'm not as thrilled about being chased around as I used to be. I want to be more measured in what I do. And Mark wasn't like that. Mark was like, ooh, and sometimes I had to tell him to quieten down. But they were good matches. I mean, I can't say they were fabulous. You couldn't knock Rocco. He was a bundle of energy, and the audience appreciated that, and so did I because it was good for me. I mean, I didn't have to tell him to come back and get going, like I did certain people in the job. I'll just mention one person here that I used to have to try and get going. Steve Regal, Darren, his name was Darren, wrestled as William Regal in the States. Now, when he was over here, I mean, he may have changed a lot when he went over there. I didn't know him. But when he was here, I used to think he was a lazy bugger, basically, in the ring. And it was nothing like Mark. You couldn't make a comparison. Mark had run rings round him. So some people you had to calm down and others you had to try and jolly up. So there's a big contrast between the characters, isn't there? Steve was more laid back and Mark was all hell and fire and brimstone. You haven't asked me about him, though, did you? Ask me about these other two guys, so I'll just chuck that in for a bit of fun. Right, the next question comes from Timothy Cross 4, and he asked a similar question, really. It's about Mark Rollerball Rocco and how did you find working with him with the weight difference? And did you ever wrestle Fit Finlay? Seems to be the essence of his question. Well, I've already said about Mark, and as far as Mark was concerned, going back to what I was saying before, there's no difference. His weight difference didn't make a difference. He made up for the weight difference with this energy, this bundle of energy that was. So I don't think the audience or anybody ever thought, oh, he's too light. He never was, because he was larger than life in the ring, wasn't he? Mark was full of energy and full of personality. I mean, his dad was like that as well. You know, he was the guy who first wrestled a professional match. They knew the job. Of course, he would do, wouldn't he? He was brought up by the expert, wasn't he? He lived with his father, didn't he, for a while? So he's a chip off the old block, basically. You can't say anything about Mark that's. You couldn't knock him as a professional. He was really good. And as far as Fit Finn is concerned, no, I've never wrestled Fit Finlay like that, but I have tagged with him, but he was on my side. So we didn't actually get in the ring as opponents, but we have tagged together, and several times when he and I have been in the ring, we've had quite exciting results, really. And Princess Paula, who was his manageress at the time, she used to have to stand at the back and look after Lawrence, because at that time, Lawrence was going around me as my sort of second. And of course, the audience would want to get hold of him, you see. But Princess Paula was a bit more butch than he was. So she used to look after him. But as far as I'm concerned, I mean, I never sort of wrestled against him, but I felt that our tag matches were substantial. So I can't add or detract from that. Right, the next question is George Glenn 8080. What do you think of British wrestling now, and who do you think is a good wrestler today on the British scene? Well, I don't know an awful lot about the British wrestling now. I mean, I only know in the context of what I'm doing with Sanji Bagga. I don't see a lot of British wrestlers. I don't go around other promotions, and as you probably know, there are lots of small promotions now. There's very few organisations like Joint Promotions, and All Star was when Brian was running it, when he had the television, and it was a much bigger organisation. They're very fragmented and small organisations now, running, half a dozen to 10 or 12 shows. I think it's very difficult for young wrestlers to establish themselves. They haven't got the television, and they've got an awful lot to live up to, really. Everything's been done, hasn't it? If you're coming in now, if I was coming in now, you find it difficult to find something that's unique, that you can really latch onto and promote as something totally different. Because when I came in the business, of course, I was unique. I got this wonderful outfit, this gimmick, and let's call it a gimmick. It's a gimmick based on a lot of skill, because I was genuinely a judo, kendo, and martial arts expert, really. Underneath all that, that gimmickry, there was some substance. But I was lucky because I really had everything going for me, plus the fact that there was very little competition. The nearest competition I had was Billy Two Rivers with a bit of a Mohican haircut, perhaps the ballet dancer with the ballet shoes on, Jackie Palla with a fancy jacket. Who else was there? I mean, Mick McMahon's running around with a strange haircut and things like that. And there wasn't anybody that really... One or two big lads like Bruno Elrington and the Stacks, of course, and then you got Sherwood with the big belly, but there was nobody with this outrageous concept. Now, going forward, when Vince McMahon Jr. gets hold of the organisation, he creates a lot of characters, and we've just been talking about one, The Undertaker. We didn't have anything like that when I was doing it. There's no Undertakers or anything like that. So the lads today trying to get over, we call it getting over, difficult job. Very, very difficult to do something that stands out from the crowd. If you go into a dressing room and you look round and you look at the other lads and you see yourself, what do? It's very hard. I wouldn't like to try it. I think it'd be extremely difficult. To get over now in the business as it is with so much history of fun and games and outrageous performances that the public have seen, it's extremely difficult. I wouldn't try to advise anybody what and what not to do. Do what you do and hope for the best. So I think that winds it up for today, except the fact that I'm still in this feud with Bagger, of course, which is ongoing. He's done some sort of strange video about me being, is it something, what's this character? Willy Wonka, is it? I change into Willy Wonka halfway through the video. Well, I hope he takes it more serious on the night, because he's not going to be in that ring with Willy Wonka, I can tell you. He's going to be in that ring with Kendo Nagasaki. And he's going to have to change his tune if he's going to survive. So I'm looking forward to seeing the old bugger and dealing with him. So I'm on my way. Bye for now.